He is a monster in an obscenely expensive ensemble, a man of raw power and luxurious taste. Most people tremble when Brooks Callahan enters a room. I chose to correct his comma usage. The boardroom went cold. The monsters went silent. Then the Lycan boss cleared the room to give me a private lesson I will never forget. The moon rises. The doors are locked. The boss has a new obsession. Chapter 1. Oakhurst's afternoon sun glared through the boardroom glass, casting long shadows across the mahogany table. Brooks Callahan sat at the head, staring a hole into the projector screen. A worn, leather-bound notebook rested near his right hand, filled with Syndicate schedules. On his left wrist, a heavy platinum watch sat secure, the cool, scratch-resistant metal serving as a quiet testament to his wealth. He despised corporate meetings. He craved quiet woods and open air. Frustration coiled in his chest, hot and sharp. He let his iron controls slip for a fraction of a second. The raw, commanding power of his alpha aura rolled outward like a tidal wave. Every Lycan in the boardroom stiffened. Beta Levi Holden, seated to his right, dropped his gaze to the floor. The enforcers standing guard near the heavy oak doors stopped breathing. The atmosphere grew thick, a suffocating pressure meant to force obedience from the pack. At the front of the room stood Harper Evans. She measured 5'6", with an athletic, practical build. A wild cascade of dark curls pulled back in a simple band framed her face. Her bright, expressive brown eyes scanned the terrified executives with mild confusion. On the podium next to her rested a brown leather satchel, a dented stainless steel coffee thermos, and a small bottle of sweet almond hand lotion. In her right hand, she held a lucky yellow click pen. Brooks expected her to pack up and run. Humans always ran when his temper flared. Instead, her pen clicked. The sharp plastic sound echoed in the silent room. "Mr. Callahan," Harper said, her voice clear and polite. "I appreciate the focus. However, we need to address the 5th slide." Brooks blinked. The shock hit him like a swift kick to the ribs. His inner wolf, usually a snarling beast ready to fight outsiders, sat down in his mind and offered a shy, confused whimper. The beast liked her bravery. She pointed the yellow pen at the screen. "Your marketing copy here uses a comma splice. It forces two independent thoughts together without a proper break. That is a grammatical nightmare for a public rebrand." Levi choked on a gasp, turning the noise into a rough cough to hide his amusement. Harper smiled, radiating a warm, positive energy. "We want the copper-jaw front to sound professional, not confused. A simple period works better. Accountability in grammar translates to trust in business." Brooks stared. She did not feel the magical push. Human. Blind to the predator sitting 10 feet away. She has no idea she just scolded a monster in front of his fighters. He leaned forward. The chair groaned under his weight. "You are correcting my punctuation." "I am saving your public image," Harper replied. She tapped the end of the yellow click pen against her chin. "Small details dictate success." Brooks looked at the men around him. Sweat beaded on their foreheads. The tension sparked, dangerous and volatile. He needed them out before his instincts demanded a territorial fight. "Out!" Brooks commanded. Chairs scraped the floor. Files slammed shut. Within 10 seconds, the boardroom emptied, leaving only Levi hesitating near the door. "You too, Levi," Brooks ordered. Levi offered a sly smirk before slipping out and shutting the heavy oak doors. Brooks stood up. He towered at 6'4", his broad shoulders and muscular frame built for combat blocking the window's light. His sharp facial features and messy dark hair cast a long shadow. He walked toward the podium. Harper held her ground. She picked up her thermos, unscrewed the lid, and took a calm sip. "Let's talk about punctuation in private," Brooks said, his tone a low rumble. "I charge extra for tutoring," Harper countered. Brooks crossed his arms, the leather of his watch strap creaking. "You stand in a room full of dangerous men, and your only concern is a dot above a comma?" My concern is the $5 million campaign you hired me to pitch, she corrected, setting the thermos down. Your team looked ready to faint. I assumed the financial numbers overwhelmed them, but business requires a clear head. If you want this rebrand to succeed, you need to fix the copy. His inner wolf scratched at the back of his mind, demanding he step closer. The beast wanted to learn more about this fearless woman. Brooks ignored the urge, keeping a safe distance. You are hired, Brooks stated. Exclusive contract. You work only for the Syndicate starting tomorrow. Harper raised an eyebrow. I run an independent consulting firm, Mr. Callahan. I do not drop my other clients on a whim. I will buy out your other contracts, he offered without hesitation. Name the price. Money does not buy my exclusivity, she replied, her tone firm. Transparency does. I need full access to your operation to rebrand it properly. Brooks studied her steady gaze. He saw no fear, only a steadfast demand for respect. Deal, he agreed. Chapter 2. Harper watched the imposing CEO accept her terms without a flinch. She lifted her open thermos and took another sip of black coffee, letting the caffeine steady her nerves. The man radiated an intense, overwhelming energy that made the hair on her arms stand up. Yet, she refused to back down. A verbal agreement is a good start, Harper said, setting the thermos down. But I require a formal contract, one that outlines my exact duties, my access levels, and your obligations to my firm. Brooks uncrossed his arms. He walked to the mahogany table, picked up his worn, leather-bound notebook, and flipped it open. I will have my legal team draft a $400,000 retainer by tomorrow morning. You get full access to the public-facing ledgers and the warehouse records. He throws money around like it is cheap paper, hoping to buy obedience. Harper packed her lucky yellow click pen into her leather satchel. She grabbed the small bottle of sweet almond hand lotion and her open thermos, stowing the lotion in the side pocket while holding the steel cup. The retainer is acceptable. The access is not. Public ledgers only tell half a story. If I am rebuilding the Copperjaw Syndicate's image, I need to see the flaws. I need the internal communication logs. Brooks paused. His dark gray eyes locked onto hers. The silence stretched, heavy and probing. Internal logs contain sensitive operational details. My competitors would pay a fortune for that data. Then it is a good thing I am not a competitor, Harper countered. She zipped her satchel shut and slung it over her shoulder. Mr. Callahan, my last business partner, kept secrets. He hid debts, stole my marketing strategies, and left me to deal with the fallout. I do not work in the dark anymore. If you want my expertise, you give me the truth. A strange shift occurred in his posture. The cranky, intimidating wall he projected softened just a fraction. He tilted his head, studying her face as if searching for a lie. He found none. You want accountability, Brooks stated. I demand it, she corrected, polite but firm. I do not impose my rules to be difficult. I do it to ensure we both succeed. If that is a problem, I can leave right now and we can forget this pitch ever happened. She turned toward the door, her sensible heels clicking against the polished hardwood floor. She made it 3 steps before his voice stopped her. Wait. Harper glanced back over her shoulder. You get the internal logs, Brooks said. He closed the notebook. I will bring the initial files to your office tonight. You can review them before signing the contract. My office is my apartment for now, Harper clarified. I work from home on Thursdays. Text me the address, he instructed. I will be there at 8. Harper gave a single nod. Bring a pen, and maybe a dictionary, just in case. A muscle twitched in his jaw, but she caught the faint glimmer of amusement in his eyes. She smiled, a bright, genuine expression, before walking out of the boardroom. The hallway outside remained deserted, the executives having vanished without a trace. She rode the elevator down to the parking garage, her mind racing with the possibilities of the new contract. A $400,000 retainer meant stability. It meant she could finally stop looking over her shoulder and focus on building a future. She reached her reliable plum-colored 2021 Honda Civic hatchback. She unlocked the door, tossed her satchel onto the passenger seat, and climbed behind the wheel. The engine purred to life. She pulled out of the dark garage and into the bright Oakhurst traffic, feeling a rare sense of victory. She had stood up to the scariest man in the city, and she had won. Chapter 3. The Oakhurst streetlights flickered as Brooks steered his midnight blue armored SUV into a quiet residential neighborhood. He parked near the curb, cutting the engine. Sitting on the passenger seat was a sturdy cardboard box filled with the Syndicate's internal operational logs. He grabbed the box and stepped out into the cool night air. His senses flared to life. He could hear the hum of distant televisions, the rattle of a loose street lamp, and the steady thrum of life in the apartment building ahead. He spotted Harper's plum-colored hatchback parked a few spaces down, confirming he had the right location. Brooks walked up the concrete steps to the third floor. He knocked on door 3B. A moment later, the locks clicked. Harper opened the door, wearing comfortable jeans and an oversized sweater. She offered a warm, welcoming smile. "Right on time," she noted, stepping aside. "Come in. I cleared the dining table for the files." Brooks stepped inside. The apartment felt bright, cozy, and vibrant, a stark contrast to his gloomy compound. Before he could set the box down, a loud, high-pitched bark shattered the quiet. A tiny, golden-furred Pomeranian fluffball charged out of the hallway. The dog stopped dead in the center of the living room, staring at the towering Lycan Alpha. It barked again, a fierce, judgmental sound meant to establish dominance. Brooks froze. He stared down at the creature. It weighed perhaps 5 pounds. "Waffles, no!" Harper scolded gently. "He is a guest." Waffles ignored her. He trotted forward, his tiny nose twitching. He sniffed the edge of Brooks's trousers. Then, with total confidence, the dog climbed straight onto Brooks's left foot, settling his fluffy body over the luxurious $4,000 Italian leather shoe. Waffles let out a long sigh, closed his eyes, and fell asleep. Brooks did not move a muscle. His inner wolf, a creature of brutal violence and territorial rage, rolled onto its back in his mind, charmed by the tiny animal. The beast whimpered, afraid to disturb the sleeping puff of fur. "If I shift my weight, I might crush it." "I apologize," Harper laughed, covering her mouth. "He thinks he is a guard dog, but he usually just falls asleep during high-stress situations." "It is fine," Brooks rumbled, his voice tight. "Where do you want the box?" "On the table," she pointed. "You can step forward, he will move." "I cannot move," Brooks admitted, staring straight ahead. Harper stopped laughing. She looked at his rigid posture, then down at the sleeping Pomeranian. A look of realization crossed her features. "Are you afraid of waking him up?" "He looks comfortable," Brooks defended. Harper walked over, her expression dancing with pure amusement. She bent down and scooped the dog into her arms. Waffles grunted in protest but stayed asleep against her sweater. "You are free," she teased. Brooks let out a slow breath, stepping forward to drop the sturdy box onto the wooden dining table. "These are the logs from the last 6 months. It shows every supplier, every shipping route, and every delay." "Good," Harper said, shifting Waffles to one arm. She reached into the box and pulled out the top file. "I will start tonight. Assuming everything looks clean, I will come to the Copperjaw compound tomorrow morning to sign the paperwork." Brooks watched her review the first page. The soft lighting of the apartment caught the genuine warmth of her smile. He felt a strange pull in his chest, an instinctual urge to stay in this bright, warm room rather than return to his empty, fortified home. "The gates open at 8, Brooks told her, forcing himself to step toward the door. "Tell the enforcers your name. They will let you in." "Have a good night, Mr. Callahan," she called out as he reached the hallway. He paused, glancing back at the fearless woman holding the tiny dog. "Brooks. Call me Brooks." Chapter 4. The morning sun hung low in the sky. Harper loaded her leather satchel and thermos into her plum-colored hatchback, then drove along the winding coastal road toward the Copperjaw compound. She felt a surge of nervous excitement. Last night's review of the files revealed a chaotic but functional supply chain. She knew exactly how to streamline their operations. She pulled up to a set of towering iron gates flanked by thick stone walls. 2 hulking men stood guard. They wore dark tactical gear and scowled at her approaching vehicle. Harper rolled down her window, turning off the engine. She grabbed a white cardboard box from the passenger seat. On her way out of the city, she had stopped at a local bakery, deciding a peace offering was the best way to start a new job. "Name and business," the larger enforcer demanded, stepping up to her window. He crossed his arms, trying to project a threatening aura. "Harper Evans," she replied, matching his stare with a bright smile. "I am the new marketing consultant. Brooks Callahan is expecting me." The guard frowned, checking a tablet in his hand. "You are the human." "I am," she confirmed. She lifted the bakery box. "And I brought fresh croissants, cinnamon and chocolate. You look like a chocolate kind of guy." The enforcer blinked, his tough exterior slipping for a second. He glanced at the box, then back at her. "We are not supposed to take bribes." "It is not a bribe, it is breakfast," Harper insisted, holding the box higher. "Take 2, share with your partner." The man hesitated, then reached through the window and pulled out 2 large pastries. "Gate opening," he mumbled into his shoulder radio, stepping back. The iron gates swung inward. Harper drove through, leaving the confused but chewing guards behind. She navigated a long paved driveway that led to a sprawling, fortress-like estate. Dark stone buildings surrounded a central courtyard. It looked more like a military base than a corporate headquarters. She parked near the main entrance, grabbed her satchel and thermos, and stepped out. "The pastry trick works every time," a voice called out. Harper turned to see Beta Levi Holden leaning against a stone pillar. He wore a sharp gray suit, his hands tucked into his pockets. He offered a laid-back, humorous grin. "Levi, right?" Harper asked, walking toward him. "We met briefly yesterday, before Brooks kicked you out of the boardroom." Levi laughed aloud. "Guilty! Welcome to the Copperjaw Syndicate, Harper. The boss is waiting for you in his office. Though I should warn you, he is in one of his moods." "Gloomy and brooding?" she guessed. "Always," Levi confirmed, pushing off the pillar to lead the way inside. "He carries the weight of the world on those broad shoulders. He actively avoids us most days just to find some peace and quiet. They rely on him for everything, and it exhausts him." Harper followed Levi through the grand double doors. The interior matched the outside: dark wood, heavy furniture, and a distinct lack of natural light. It felt oppressive. She made a mental note to address the interior design later. "He needs to delegate more," Harper observed as they walked down a long corridor. "A leader cannot fight every battle alone." Levi stopped in front of a solid oak door. He looked down at her, his expression turning sincere. "We tell him that all the time. He never listens. But he listened to you yesterday. That is why you are here." Levi knocked twice on the oak panel, then pushed it open. "Boss, the consultant has arrived, and she brought pastries to corrupt the guards." Brooks sat behind a solid oak desk, reviewing a thick manifest, his jaw set in a hard line. He looked up, his sharp gaze finding Harper. The dark scowl vanished, replaced by a focused, steady gaze. "Come in," Brooks ordered. Harper stepped into the office, ready to get to work. Chapter 5. Harper organized her workspace across from Brooks. The solid oak desk offered plenty of room for the Syndicate ledgers. She unzipped her brown leather satchel, retrieving her dented stainless steel coffee thermos and placing it on a coaster. Next came the lucky yellow click pen. She tapped the plastic end against the open ledger, reviewing the numbers from the Oakhurst shipping docks. The room sat in thick silence. Brooks reviewed his own paperwork, his dark hair falling across his forehead. He radiated a tense, coiled energy. He hated sitting still. Your northbound trucks run empty on the return trips from the mountain sector, Harper observed, breaking the quiet. You cover the fuel, the maintenance, and the driver wages, but you bring zero revenue back down the hill. That burns capital for no reason. Brooks did not look up from his leather-bound notebook. We export timber and imported steel. The mountain towns do not produce anything we need to bring back to the city. Then lease the empty cargo space to local farmers, Harper countered, clicking her pen. Or independent brewers. They need transport to the coast. You have the trucks. Charge them a $10,000 monthly flat rate per vehicle. It turns a dead trip into a profit center, and it builds goodwill with the locals. Brooks stopped writing. He raised his head, his sharp gaze finding hers. He studied her face for a long moment. The rigid line of his jaw relaxed just a fraction. You want the Copperjaw Syndicate to haul root vegetables and craft beer? Brooks stated, his tone flat. I want the Copperjaw Syndicate to show a legitimate, unshakable profit margin, Harper corrected, offering a bright smile. Good business is about efficiency. Brooks closed his notebook. He leaned back in his leather chair, the leather creaking under his broad combat build. He looked at her as if she were a puzzle he could not figure out. Harper felt a sudden wave of dry skin on her palms, a side effect of handling dusty paper files all morning. She reached into the side pocket of her leather satchel and pulled out the small bottle of sweet almond hand lotion. She popped the plastic cap, squeezed a dime-sized drop onto her palm, and snapped the lid shut. She rubbed her hands together. The friction warmed the lotion. Across the desk, Brooks went still. The fresh wave of sweet almond drifted through the air. He had caught faint traces of the pleasant fragrance on her before, but watching her apply it in the quiet office scrambled his senses. The concentrated scent broke his defenses. His inner wolf, a creature built on territorial aggression and raw violence, froze. The beast did not snarl. It did not demand a fight. Instead, the wolf dropped its head onto its paws in his mind, letting out a soft, contented sigh. The wild animal felt safe. It wanted to curl up by her feet and sleep. Brooks gripped the armrests of his chair. His knuckles turned white. His body ran hot by nature, but a cold sweat broke out across the back of his neck. He spent every second of his life maintaining total, flawless control over his animal instincts. This human woman dismantled his defenses with a single drop of lotion. If I stay in this room, I will drop to my knees and surrender my territory to a woman I met yesterday. He could not allow that. He needed his edge. He needed his anger to protect the pack. Brooks stood up. The sudden movement sent his leather chair rolling backward. It hit the wood paneling with a dull thud. Harper jumped, her eyes widening. She dropped her hands to the desk. Did I say something wrong about the trucks? The trucks are fine, Brooks gritted out, his voice a low, rough rumble. He refused to look at her. He stared at the far wall, his chest heaving with deep, rapid breaths. Then what is the problem? She asked, her tone polite but firm, demanding accountability for his sudden mood swing. I have to check the perimeter, Brooks announced. Before she could ask another question, Brooks turned on his heel. He marched across the office, pulled the heavy oak door open, and stepped into the hallway. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving Harper alone in the sudden, echoing quiet of the Alpha's office. She stared at the closed door, twirling the yellow click pen between her fingers in pure confusion. Chapter 6. Harper sat alone for an hour. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked a slow, steady rhythm. She finished reviewing the shipping ledgers, sipping the last of her black coffee from her thermos. She refused to let his sudden exit rattle her focus. The oak door finally opened. Brooks walked back into the office. The wild, panicked energy from earlier was gone, replaced by his usual brooding presence. He carried 2 large, foil-wrapped containers from a local steakhouse. Heat radiated from the hot food, warming the cool office. You missed lunch, Brooks said. He set one of the containers on the desk near her satchel. Eat. Thank you, Harper replied, pulling the container closer. She opened the lid, finding a thick cut of prime rib and roasted potatoes. Lycans had immense appetites, and she guessed he ordered enough to feed 3 normal people. Brooks sat down behind his desk. He opened his own container and began eating with efficient, focused bites. The silence stretched between them, but it lacked the tense hostility of the morning. "I apologize for leaving," Brooks said abruptly. He did not look up from his food. Harper paused with her fork halfway to her mouth. She lowered it. "Apology accepted. I prefer direct communication, Brooks. If my methods bother you, tell me." "Your methods are fine," he assured her. He set his fork down and leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. His piercing gaze anchored onto her face. "You organize a chaotic business without breaking a sweat. You correct my mistakes without flinching. But you run your consulting firm from a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood. Why?" Harper stiffened. She placed her fork on the napkin. "Low overhead. I prefer to keep my business expenses minimal." "A lie," Brooks countered. His tone held no anger, only a quiet certainty. "You smell like burnt sugar when you are nervous. You are hiding something." Harper tightened her grip on her thermos. She hated the Lycan ability to read emotions through scent. She looked away, staring at the brass handles on the filing cabinets. "If I give him the truth, I hand him the ammunition to destroy my career all over again." "My living situation is my own business," Harper deflected, her voice cooling. "We are here to fix your public image, not to dissect my life choices." Brooks watched her. His inner wolf whined, hating the sudden distance she put between them. The beast urged him to fix it, to offer comfort. Brooks ignored the animal, relying on his own instincts as a man. He unbuckled the heavy platinum watch from his left wrist. The thick metal clasp clicked. He placed the timepiece on the desk, a gesture of disarming himself. "I am the Alpha of the Copperjaw Syndicate," Brooks stated, his voice low and steady. "I run gambling dens, protection details, and supply lines. I deal with thieves, liars, and killers every single day. I know what it looks like when someone expects to be stabbed in the back." Harper snapped her gaze back to him, her brown eyes flashing with defensive pride. "I do not steal," Brooks promised, leaning closer. The raw sincerity in his voice cut through her defenses. "I protect what belongs to my pack, and I pay for what I use. You demanded transparency from me yesterday. I gave it to you. I handed over my private ledgers. Now I am asking for the same from you." Harper relaxed her grip. She looked at the platinum watch resting between them, then up at his steady, intense gaze. The cranky, intimidating boss was gone. In his place sat a man offering a genuine truce. She took a slow breath, letting the tension bleed out of her shoulders. She reached for her lucky yellow click pen, kneading the familiar plastic shape in her hand to steady her nerves. "My last business partner's name was Gregory Dunn," Harper began, her voice quiet but steady in the large room. Chapter 7. "Gregory and I started the firm right out of college," Harper explained, turned the yellow pen over in her fingers. "I built the marketing strategies. I handled the client relations. He managed the finances and the legal contracts." Brooks sat stone still, listening. He pushed his half-empty food container aside. "We landed a huge account," Harper continued, forcing herself to keep her voice level. "A tech startup out of the capital. It was a $2 million campaign. I worked 90-hour weeks for 6 months to build the pitch. When the startup signed the contract, Gregory restructured our LLC. He locked me out of the company bank accounts." Brooks felt his body temperature spike. A dangerous heat flooded his veins. "He took the tech account," she said, her usual bright optimism fading into a hollow echo. "He took the proprietary data I wrote. Then he left me holding a $200,000 business loan he took out in my name. I lost my apartment. I lost my reputation because he told the industry I suffered a nervous breakdown." The air in the office grew hot. Brooks gripped the edge of his solid oak desk. "I will find the man who stole her light and bury him under his own stolen wealth." His inner beast raged against its mental cage. The wolf demanded violence. It wanted to hunt Gregory Dunn, tear his throat out, and drag the remains back to Harper as a trophy. Brooks felt his teeth aching, his jaw locking tight as the shift threatened to take hold. His knuckles turned stark white against the dark wood of the desk. Harper noticed the sudden change. She saw the lethal tension radiating from his broad shoulders. She stopped talking, gripping her pen tighter. Brooks closed his eyes. He forced the feral urge down, chaining the wolf to the floor of his mind. He took a long, deep breath, counting the seconds until his heart rate slowed. He would not lose control in front of her. He would not become another monster in her life. When he opened his eyes, the gray depths were calm. "You paid the loan off," Brooks guessed, his voice a gravelly whisper. "Every penny," Harper confirmed, her chin lifting with renewed pride. "It took 3 years of freelance consulting. I moved into the apartment in Oakhurst to save money. I rebuilt my client list from scratch. I do not rely on partners anymore. I do the work, and I demand direct payment." "You survived," Brooks stated. It was not a question. It was a profound acknowledgement of her strength. "I did," she agreed, placing the yellow pen next to her thermos. "But it taught me a hard lesson about trust. When you handed me the keys to your entire operation yesterday, it terrified me. People do not hand over that kind of power unless they plan to use it as a trap." Brooks reached across the desk. He did not touch her, but he rested his large hand near hers. The heat radiating from his skin felt like a warm furnace in the cool office. "There are no traps here," Brooks promised, his tone fierce and unwavering. "You are safe in this compound. No one takes credit for your work. No one touches your accounts. If Gregory Dunn ever steps foot in Oakhurst, I will handle him." Harper looked at his hand, then up to his face. The unwavering loyalty in his expression struck a deep chord in her chest. She had fought her battles alone for so long, she forgot what it felt like to have a shield standing in front of her. A genuine smile broke across her face, bright and warm. "I appreciate the offer, Brooks, but I handle my own problems." Brooks let out a short, rough sound that might have been a laugh. He pulled his hand back, the tension finally leaving his shoulders. "I believe you." Chapter 8. The fragile peace in the office shattered. A high-pitched, wailing siren erupted across the Copperjaw compound. The mechanical scream pierced the thick stone walls, vibrating the glass in the windows. Brooks shot out of his chair. The desk rattled. His calm demeanor vanished, replaced by the terrifying presence of the Alpha Warlord. He grabbed his leather-bound notebook and shoved it into a drawer, slamming it shut. The heavy oak door burst open. Beta Levi Holden stood in the doorway, his laid-back humor erased. He held a sleek black radio in his left hand, his face pale and tight. "Iron Fang," Levi reported, his voice cutting through the siren noise. "Garrett pushed across the Southern Territory lines near the old shipping yards. He brought 30 fighters. They are attacking the perimeter guards right now." Brooks snarled. The sound was not human. It rolled from deep within his chest, a primal, violent noise that made the hair on Harper's arms stand up. "Rally the enforcers," Brooks commanded, his voice carrying the heavy alpha push that forced Levi to nod sharply. "Get the transport vans moving. No one breaches my borders and lives." Levi turned and sprinted down the hallway, shouting orders into his radio. Brooks turned back to the desk. He did not look at Harper. He stared at his own hands. The shift was already starting. His bones popped and cracked with loud, sickening snaps. His broad shoulders widened further, tearing the seams of his tailored shirt. Harper stood up, gripping her dented stainless steel thermos. She did not scream. She did not cower. She watched the man transform into a weapon. "Brooks," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos. He froze, fighting the agonizing pain of the transformation. He looked over his shoulder. His dark gaze bled into a piercing, unnatural gold. His jaw elongated, his teeth sharpening into brutal fangs. He is not a CEO managing a supply chain. He is a predator marching into a slaughter. "Stay in this room," Brooks ordered, his voice distorted and thick around his changing teeth. "Lock the door. Do not open it for anyone except Levi or Cora." "Go," Harper urged, her expression fierce and brave. "Protect your people." Brooks gave a jerky nod. He lunged toward the open doorway, his boots tearing the carpet. By the time he hit the corridor, the human shape was gone, replaced by the towering, terrifying form of a hulking Lycan beast. He disappeared into the shadows, a roar shaking the foundation of the building. Harper rushed to the solid oak door. She pushed it shut, the latch clicking into place. She threw the solid steel deadbolt, securing the room. Outside the window, the courtyard erupted into organized violence. Hulking enforcers piled into armored vehicles. Weapons clattered against metal. The gates swung wide open, and the convoy roared out into the coastal twilight, heading south. Harper walked to the window, clutching her thermos to her chest. She looked out at the empty, quiet courtyard left behind. The siren finally cut off, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. She realized the true danger of his world. The ledgers and the marketing plans were just a thin cover over a brutal, bloody reality. Brooks Callahan carried the lives of hundreds of people on his shoulders, fighting physical wars in the dark to keep them safe. She walked back to the solid oak desk. She picked up the heavy platinum watch Brooks had left behind. The polished metal felt warm from his skin. She closed her hand around it, standing guard in the empty office, waiting for the Alpha to return. Chapter 9. Harper sat in Brooks's solid oak desk chair, the platinum watch resting flat against her palm. She traced the smooth metal casing with her thumb. The silence in the compound felt suffocating after the roaring chaos of the departure. She glanced at the grandfather clock in the corner. An hour had passed since the convoy rolled out into the coastal twilight. A sharp knock broke the quiet. Harper stiffened, her grip tightening on the watch. She set it on the desk and picked up her dented stainless steel coffee thermos, holding it like a blunt weapon. Brooks had given her strict orders to stay locked inside unless it was Levi or Cora. "Who is it?" Harper asked, stepping toward the heavy oak door. "Dr. Cora Lynn," a brisk, no-nonsense voice replied from the hallway. "Open up, human. I need access to the Alpha's private medical cache." Harper slid the solid steel deadbolt back and pulled the door open. A woman in her late 50s stepped into the room. Dr. Cora wore a practical gray lab coat over a dark sweater and jeans. Her black hair was pulled into a tight bun, and her sharp eyes swept over Harper with quick, clinical efficiency. She carried a large canvas medical bag. "You are Evans," Cora stated, walking past her toward a hidden wall panel behind the filing cabinets. "I am," Harper confirmed, locking the door behind her again. "Is there any news from the shipping yards?" "A bloodbath," Cora stated, punching a code into the wall keypad. The panel slid open, revealing shelves stacked with bandages, surgical tools, and glass jars filled with dried herbs. "Garrett brought silver-tipped weapons. Our fighters are taking heavy damage. They are falling back to the compound." Harper felt a cold chill settle in her chest. She remembered the rules from the lore Brooks had mentioned over lunch. Silver burned Lycan skin and stopped their fast healing abilities. "How can I help?" Harper asked, setting the thermos down. Cora began stuffing rolls of gauze and jars of foul-smelling crushed plants into her bag. "You stay out of the way. When a wolf is hurt, their animal instinct takes over. They snap, bite, and defend their injuries. A human wandering through the infirmary is just asking to lose an arm." "I am not helpless," Harper insisted, demanding accountability in the crisis. "I can fetch supplies. I can boil water. Give me a task." Cora paused, looking at the brave, stubborn set of Harper's jaw. The doctor let out a short sigh. "Fine," Cora agreed, tossing a large bundle of white towels onto the desk. "Take those down to the basement infirmary. Set them on the metal prep tables. Do not touch the surgical kits and stay behind the yellow line painted on the floor. If a wounded Lycan snarls at you, you drop your eyes and walk away. I am not dropping my eyes for anyone, but I will play by her rules to be useful. Harper grabbed the towels. Understood. They left the office together. The compound corridors were no longer empty. Wives, husbands, and older pack members moved with practiced speed, transforming the grand halls into a triage center. Delta-class wolves dragged cots into the main lobby, preparing for the overflow of injured fighters. A low, collective murmur rippled through the crowd. Harper followed the sound and looked toward the main entrance. The towering iron gates groaned open. The armored convoy returned, the vehicles dented and splattered with dark mud. The doors burst open before the engines even cut off. Chapter 10. Chaos flooded the courtyard. Enforcers poured out of the vans, supporting limping packmates. A dark haze of smoke and dust followed them inside. Harper stood near the infirmary doors, clutching the bundle of towels. She scanned the battered crowd, her heart hammering against her ribs. She looked for the towering, broad-shouldered form of the Alpha. "Clear the path!" Levi shouted, his voice rough and exhausted. His sharp gray suit was torn, the left sleeve soaked in dark blood. Two enforcers dragged a struggling Garrett through the doors. The rival Alpha was covered in dirt, his hands bound with thick iron chains. He spat curses, but a swift, brutal kick to the back of his knees from an enforcer dropped him to the stone floor. They hauled him away toward the holding cells. Behind them walked Brooks. He was back in his human form. His tailored shirt hung in shreds. Dark dirt smeared his exhausted expression, and a deep, jagged cut ran down his left bicep. The wound smoked faintly, a clear sign of a silver burn fighting his natural healing. He looked exhausted, carrying a dark, dangerous aura that made the rest of the pack give him a wide berth. He locked eyes with Harper. He stopped walking. The feral, untamed energy rolling off him clashed with the quiet, domestic sight of her holding white towels. He looked away, his jaw clenching tight. "Cora," Brooks growled, pushing past the medics. "Deal with the beta first." Levi took a silver blade to the shoulder. "Sit down, boss," Cora ordered, pointing to a metal exam table. "I have enough hands to treat you both." Brooks ignored her. He retreated to a dark corner of the infirmary, sliding down the concrete wall to sit on the floor. He pulled his knees up, resting his forearms on them, burying his face in his hands. He pushed his pack away, retreating into his solitary burden. Harper set the towels on the nearest prep table. She walked past the yellow line painted on the floor. "Evans!" Cora warned sharply. Harper ignored the doctor. She picked up a clean cloth, soaked it in a basin of warm water, and walked straight into the Alpha's shadowed corner. Brooks heard her approach. "Go away, Harper. I am not in the mood for company." He thinks he has to carry the pain alone. Harper did not argue. She knelt beside him. She took his large, dirt-covered right hand and began wiping the grime from his knuckles with the warm cloth. Brooks flinched at the gentle contact, his head snapping up. His gaze was wild, the piercing gold of his wolf still bleeding around the edges of his dark gray irises. He expected her to flinch, to pull away from the monster he had just been. Instead, she offered a warm, steady presence. She finished cleaning his right hand, dropped the cloth back into the basin, and reached into her pocket. She pulled out a small, foil-wrapped protein bar she had shoved into her jeans pocket earlier. "Eat," Harper instructed, tearing the wrapper open and handing it to him. Brooks stared at the cheap bar, then at her steady expression. The feral edge in his eyes softened, returning to their natural dark gray. He took the food, his fingers brushing hers. He leaned his head back against the concrete wall, chewing the dry bar. Harper sat next to him on the cold floor, offering no platitudes or demands. She just sat in comfortable, grounded silence, anchoring the Alpha back to his humanity. Chapter 11. 2 weeks passed since the border breach. The Copperjaw Syndicate settled into a new, quiet rhythm. Harper integrated into the pack's daily operations without a hitch. Her marketing strategies cleared up the bottleneck at the shipping docks, boosting their legitimate profits by 20%. But the biggest shift happened with Brooks. He stopped hiding in his office. Instead of escaping the noise of his people, the Alpha began actively seeking out the common areas. He spent his afternoons reviewing paperwork at the long wooden tables in the dining hall, always choosing a seat near Harper. They started working as a pair, an unspoken dynamic that the entire pack noticed. "The regional managers want a video conference tomorrow," Harper said, tapping her yellow click pen against a tablet screen. She sat across from Brooks in the dining hall, the mid-morning sun streaming through the high windows. Brooks looked up from a shipping manifest. His imposing warlord frame looked relaxed in a simple black t-shirt. The silver burn on his bicep had healed into a thick, silvery scar. "Cancel it," Brooks decided. "We are attending the mayor's charity gala in the city tomorrow night. It is neutral ground. I want you there to handle the public relations." Harper looked at him. The sunlight caught the strong set of his jaw, softening the intimidating CEO exterior. She admired the steady, fair leadership he provided his people. He was fiercely protective, but he never let his power become cruel. She rested her chin on her hand, staring at him with open, quiet admiration. Brooks tried to read the next line on his manifest. He read the same word 3 times. The silence stretched. The heat in his chest spiked, but it lacked the violent edge of a fight. It was a warm, nervous energy. He glanced up. She was still staring. A stark, undeniable blush crept up the thick column of his neck, reaching his cheeks. The terrifying Lycan Alpha rubbed the back of his neck, losing his train of thought. He cleared his throat, trying to regain his dominant presence, but his voice cracked slightly. "I can face 30 rogue wolves without blinking, but one look from her turns me into a stammering fool." "What?" Brooks mumbled, looking down at his paperwork. From the other end of the dining hall, Beta Levi Holden burst into loud, obnoxious laughter. His shoulder was still bandaged from the silver blade, but his laid-back humor had fully returned. "He is blushing," Levi shouted to a group of enforcers playing cards nearby. "The boss is actually blushing. Someone take a picture for the archives." Brooks's head snapped toward his second-in-command. The blush vanished, replaced by a dark, warning scowl. He picked up a spare red marker from the table and threw it with terrifying speed and accuracy. The marker nailed Levi square in the center of his forehead with a sharp thwack. The beta fell backward off his chair in exaggerated agony, clutching his face while the enforcers roared with laughter. Harper hid her own smile behind her hand, her shoulders shaking with silent amusement. Brooks turned back to her, a faint, genuine grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Tomorrow night," Brooks repeated, ignoring the chaos in the room. "Wear something nice. I will send a car." Chapter 12. The Oakhurst Grand Hotel glittered with crystal chandeliers and expensive silk drapery. The mayor's charity gala was the social event of the season, a neutral ground where corporate elites and hidden syndicate bosses rubbed shoulders in polite society. Harper stood near the edge of the ballroom, holding a flute of sparkling water. She wore a stunning, deep sapphire blue gown that flowed to the floor. She watched the crowd, keeping a sharp eye on the potential investors she needed to charm for the Copperjaw rebrand. Brooks stood 10 feet away, locked in a conversation with a city councilman. He wore a custom-tailored black tuxedo that barely contained his muscular frame. Every few minutes, his piercing gaze anchored onto her, checking her position before returning to his political maneuvering. "Miss Evans," a slick, arrogant voice interrupted her focus. Harper turned. A man in a flashy silver suit stood too close, invading her personal space. She recognized him from her research. Julian Croft, a sleazy venture capitalist known for predatory lending and aggressive takeovers. "Mr. Croft," Harper greeted, her tone polite but firm. She took a deliberate step back. Croft closed the distance again, a slimy smile stretching across his face. I heard you took over the marketing for Callahan's crew. That is a rough crowd for a beautiful woman. You should let me buy you a drink. We can discuss moving your talents to a firm that appreciates real potential." He reached out, his hand grasping her bare shoulder. Harper stiffened, her jaw clenching. She opened her mouth to tell him where he could shove his drink. Before she could speak, the air in the ballroom shifted. The ambient chatter died down. A towering shadow fell over Croft. Brooks Callahan materialized behind the corrupt investor. He did not yell. He did not throw a punch. He let his crushing alpha aura roll forward, a localized wave of pure, suffocating pressure aimed straight at the man in the silver suit. Croft gasped, his hand dropping from Harper's shoulder as if he had been burned. The color drained from his face. He stumbled backward, his eyes wide with instinctual terror as he looked up at the Lycan boss. "She is not interested," Brooks rumbled, his voice a low, vibrating threat that rattled the crystal glasses on the nearby tables. Croft did not try to argue. He turned and sprinted toward the ballroom exit, abandoning his unfinished drink on a passing waiter's tray. Harper let out a slow breath, the tension leaving her spine. "I had that under control." "I know," Brooks agreed. Step into the space Croft had vacated. He offered her his arm. "But I prefer to handle the trash myself." He did not step in to control me. He stepped in to shield me. Harper smiled, slipping her hand through the crook of his elbow. The thick fabric of his tuxedo jacket felt warm against her skin. "In that case, Mr. Callahan, would you care to escort me to the buffet? Handling trash makes me hungry." Brooks chuckled, a rich, deep sound that drew stunned looks from the surrounding guests who had never seen the brooding alpha smile. He led her toward the dining area, standing tall and protective by her side. Chapter 13. The evening air carried a crisp chill. Harper adjusted the strap of her brown leather satchel and gripped her dented stainless steel thermos. Her sensible heels clicked against the concrete of the employee parking garage. The shadows stretched long between the concrete pillars. She spotted her reliable, plum-colored hatchback parked in its usual spot. Something felt wrong. A metallic glint caught the overhead fluorescent lights. Harper slowed her pace. She stepped closer, her breath catching in her throat. A dagger stood buried deep into the metal hood of her car. The blade fractured the plum paint, spiderweb cracks spreading from the point of impact. The hilt featured a stylized iron wolf's head. The edge of the blade shimmered with an unmistakable bright, toxic sheen. Silver. "The Iron Fang stragglers know who I am and where to find me." Harper did not panic. She stared at the weapon, calculating the threat. She reached into her satchel and pulled out her phone, intending to call the Alpha. Tires screeched against the pavement. A midnight blue armored SUV tore around the corner, braking hard next to her Civic. Brooks Callahan threw the driver's door open before the vehicle even settled. He wore a crisp, white, button-down shirt, his sleeves rolled up to reveal his thick forearms and the silvery scar on his left bicep. He took one look at the dagger and let out a vicious, bone-rattling snarl. "Step away from the car," Brooks ordered, his voice vibrating with primal fury. Harper took 2 deliberate steps backward. Brooks marched toward the hatchback. He stopped inches from the silver weapon. His chest heaved with rapid breaths. He reached back into the open driver's side door and grabbed a pair of thick leather utility gloves from the console. He pulled them on, ensuring the toxic metal could not touch his skin. He gripped the dagger's hilt and yanked it free. The metal shrieked against the hood. He tossed the weapon into the armored trunk of his SUV. "Garrett is locked in our holding cells in iron chains, but his remaining fighters are sending a message," Brooks stated, pulling the gloves off and throwing them in after the blade. His jaw locked in a rigid line. "They are targeting you to get to me." Harper clutched her thermos. She looked at the hole in her hood. "It is an intimidation tactic." "It is a promise of violence," Brooks corrected. He stepped into her personal space, his towering mass blocking the drafty wind of the garage. "Get in my truck." "I need my car," Harper argued, "and I need to go home to get waffles." "Levi will send an enforcer to retrieve your Civic," Brooks replied, guiding her toward the passenger side of his SUV. "We are going to your apartment right now. You are packing a bag. You are moving into the compound. I will not leave you exposed out here." Harper paused by the door. She looked up into his sharp features. She saw no room for negotiation. She saw a protector ready to tear the city apart to keep her safe. She nodded, climbing into the passenger seat. Brooks slammed the door shut, securing her inside the armored fortress. The drive to her quiet residential neighborhood passed in tense silence. Brooks gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled force. He parked the midnight blue SUV near the curb. They climbed the concrete steps to the third floor. Harper unlocked door 3B. A tiny, golden-furred Pomeranian charged out of the hallway. Waffles stopped in the center of the living room, barking a sharp, territorial warning at the towering Lycan. Brooks offered the dog a brief nod, his protective instincts overriding his previous awkwardness around the 5-pound animal. "Pack whatever you need for an extended stay," Brooks instructed, standing guard near the front door. His gaze swept the empty living room, checking the window locks. Harper moved to her bedroom. She pulled a rolling suitcase from the closet. She packed practical clothing, her favorite sweaters, and Waffles' food bowls. She grabbed her lucky yellow click pen from the nightstand, tossing it into her leather satchel alongside her sweet almond hand lotion. She needed familiar items to anchor her in the chaotic Lycan world. Within 20 minutes, she dragged the suitcase back into the living room. Waffles trotted beside her, sensing the shift in routine. "I am ready," Harper announced. Brooks took the heavy suitcase from her hand. He opened the front door, scanning the quiet hallway before gesturing for her to step out. Harper scooped Waffles into her arms. The tiny dog rested his chin on her shoulder, letting out a soft huff. She locked the apartment door, turning her back on her independent life to step into the heart of a werewolf pack. Chapter 14. The towering iron gates of the Copperjaw compound swung open to admit the armored SUV. Brooks navigated the paved driveway, bypassing the main triage areas and parking near a secluded stone building. This structure sat separated from the main barracks. "The Alpha's wing," Brooks explained, cutting the engine. "Only Levi and Cora have clearance to approach this building without permission. You will be safe here." Harper stepped out of the vehicle, setting Waffles down on the pavement. The Pomeranian trotted toward a nearby stone pillar, sniffing the perimeter with total authority. Brooks grabbed the suitcase from the trunk. He led them through a set of thick oak double doors into a spacious, fire-lit living area. Dark wood paneled the walls. High ceilings framed tall, arched windows covered by heavy velvet drapes. The space felt secure, yet cold and empty. "Your room is down the hall on the right," Brooks pointed, setting the luggage near the hallway entrance. "My quarters are on the left. The kitchen is stocked." Harper surveyed the grand space. She picked up her satchel and thermos, carrying them to the kitchen island. "Thank you, Brooks." Brooks nodded, but he did not leave. He stood in the center of the living room. His dark hair looked messier than usual. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. His protective instincts roared, demanding he stand guard right outside her bedroom door. The idea of letting her out of his sight, even inside his own fortified home, clawed at his chest. "My wolf wants to sleep on the rug outside her room to ensure nothing touches her." He paced to the window, checked the latch, and turned back to the center of the room. He walked to the front door, tested the deadbolt, and resumed his spot on the rug. Harper watched his restless patrol from the kitchen. She recognized the coiled tension in his stance. He was exhausted, running on adrenaline and territorial fear. He needed an anchor, not a boundary. She set her thermos in the sink. She opened the dark wooden cabinets, searching until she found a kettle and a box of chamomile tea. She filled the kettle with water and turned on the stove. "You are going to wear a hole in the floorboards," Harper observed, leaning against the granite counter. Brooks stopped pacing. He looked at her, his jaw tight. "I need to ensure the perimeter holds," The enforcers hold the perimeter, Harper reminded him, her tone gentle but firm. You brought me to the safest building in the city. You need to stop moving before you pass out. Brooks ran a hand over his face. He let out a harsh breath, the sound scraping the back of his throat. I cannot turn it off. The threat is too close. The kettle began to whistle, a sharp, grounding sound. Harper pulled it from the heat. She poured the boiling water into 2 ceramic mugs, dropping a tea bag into each. She carried the steaming cups to the large leather sofa in the living room and set them on the coffee table. Sit down, Brooks, Harper offered, taking a seat on the right side of the sofa. He hesitated. He looked at the locked front door, then at the steaming mug. He crossed the room and sank onto the left side of the sofa. The leather groaned under his weight. He picked up the mug, wrapping his large hands around the warm ceramic. Waffles trotted into the room. The tiny dog ignored the plush rug resting near the fireplace. Instead, he jumped onto the sofa, crawled across the cushions, and wedged his golden-furred body against Brooks's thigh. The Alpha went rigid. He stared down at the sleeping puff of fur. He remembers you, Harper smiled, taking a sip of her tea. Brooks relaxed his shoulders, sinking deeper into the cushions. The awkward tension broke, replaced by the quiet, shared warmth of the firelit room. Chapter 15. Morning light streamed through the tall, arched windows of the Alpha's wing. Harper woke early, feeling a burst of determined energy. She unpacked her suitcase, stowing her clothes in the dark oak dresser. She placed her sweet almond hand lotion on the nightstand. The room felt cavernous and devoid of personality. She decided to fix that. She spent the next 3 hours overhauling the common areas. She pulled the velvet drapes wide open, letting the sunlight flood the dark wood paneling. She rearranged the stiff leather armchairs into a welcoming circle rather than a defensive line. She found several neglected potted plants in a forgotten sunroom and brought them out to the main lobby, water them back to life. She carried a stack of fresh linens to the dining hall, replacing the dreary gray table runners with vibrant blue ones she found in a storage closet. Beta Levi Holden walked in during her redecorating crusade. He stopped in his tracks, staring at the bright fabric. The boss is going to have a stroke, Levi warned, though a genuine grin stretched across his face. He hates color. He hates clutter, Harper corrected, flattening the fabric. Color is good for morale. Levi grabbed an apple from the fruit bowl she had just polished. I will plan his funeral, but for the record, I like the blue. Harper laughed, wiping her hands on her jeans. By noon, the fortress felt less like a military bunker and more like a home. She walked into the main courtyard, Waffles trotting at her heels. Several hulking enforcers stood near the gates, gripping their radios. They wore dark tactical gear, their faces set in permanent scowls. They watched Harper approach with blatant confusion. Humans did not wander the compound grounds alone, let alone rearrange the furniture. Good morning, Harper greeted the closest guard, a towering man with a shaved head. She offered her signature bright smile. The sun is beautiful today. The enforcer blinked, unsure how to respond to polite conversation. Morning, Miss Evans. Before the guard could say anything else, Waffles marched forward. The 5-pound Pomeranian stopped right in front of the towering Lycan. The dog let out a sharp, commanding bark, asserting his dominance over the courtyard. Then Waffles flopped onto his back, exposing his fluffy belly, demanding tribute. The enforcer stared at the tiny animal. A strange, strangled noise escaped his throat. He dropped to one knee, stripping off his tactical gloves. He reached out with thick, calloused fingers and began rubbing the dog's belly. Waffles let out a happy grunt, his back leg kicking the air. 2 more guards broke rank, crowding around the tiny dog with huge, goofy grins. He likes behind the ears, Harper advised, laughing aloud at the ridiculous contrast between the lethal fighters and the tiny pet. This place just needed a little bit of joy to break the tension. From the shadows of the arched doorway, Brooks watched the scene unfold. He stood silent, his stance relaxed and observant. He saw the sunlight catching the bright, joyful curve of Harper's smile. He heard the ringing sound of her laughter echoing across the stone courtyard. His enforcers, men who spent their lives preparing for brutal combat, were huddled on the ground playing with a fluff ball because she made it acceptable to drop their guard. The realization hit Brooks with stunning clarity. He had spent years building walls, reinforcing gates, and hoarding power to keep his people safe. He built a cage. She brought the light. She was the missing piece he never knew his pack needed. She was the missing piece his soul demanded. He stepped out of the shadows, walking toward the group. The enforcers scrambled to their feet, their tough exteriors snapping back into place. "Back to your posts," Brooks commanded, his tone even. The men scattered. Waffles rolled over, shook his fur, and trotted back to Harper. Brooks stopped in front of her. The dark scowl he usually wore was absent. "You opened all the blinds in the west wing," Brooks noted, looking down at her. "Vampires hate sunlight," Harper teased, tilting her head. "I assumed werewolves appreciated a nice day." Brooks let out a low rumble of amusement. "We do. It looks good, Harper. Thank you." Chapter 16. Midnight cloaked the Copperjaw compound in stillness. Harper sat in the quiet kitchen of the Alpha's wing, nursing a mug of decaf tea. Her lucky yellow click pen rested next to a blank legal pad. She could not sleep. The adrenaline of the relocation still buzzed in her veins. Footsteps sounded in the hallway. Brooks appeared in the archway, wearing dark sweatpants and a plain gray t-shirt. The casual clothing highlighted the thick, silvery scar on his left bicep. He looked restless, the heavy toll of leadership pressing down on his frame. "Insomnia?" Brooks asked, walking toward the kitchen island. "New environment," Harper replied, gesturing to the stool across from her. "Sit with me." Brooks pulled the stool back and sat down. He rested his forearms on the cool granite counter. The dim light from the stove hood cast long shadows across his sharp facial features. He stared at his hands, turning a plain titanium ring over his knuckles. He did not wear it, but he kept it close. "You asked why the compound looks like a fortress," Brooks began, his voice a gravelly whisper in the quiet room. "You brought plants into the lobby today. Levi said it looked like a home. It has not felt like a home in 10 years. Harper set her mug down, giving him her full attention. "My father was the Alpha before me," Brooks explained, his dark gaze locked on the granite countertop. "He believed in diplomacy. He forged treaties with the coastal packs and the mountain sectors. He made us wealthy, but he made us soft. When the Iron Fang gang first arrived in the city, my father offered Garrett a seat at the table." Brooks stopped turning the ring, his jaw clenched tight. "Garrett brought silver blades to the peace summit," Brooks continued, the memory turning his tone ice cold. "He slaughtered my father. He killed half the Elder Council. I was 22 years old. I had to take the mantle of Alpha in the middle of a bloodbath. I spent the next 5 years hunting down every rogue wolf that crossed our borders. I built the walls. I trained the enforcers. I turned a family into a syndicate to ensure we never bled like that again." Harper listened, her heart aching for the young man forced to become a warlord to survive. She understood now why he demanded total control, why he flinched at the idea of an unlocked door. "The ring belonged to him," Brooks added, tracing the worn metal. "I keep it to remember the cost of dropping my guard." "You honor him by surviving," Harper said, her voice gentle. "But you do not have to live in a bunker to prove you are strong. You are allowed to live, Brooks, not just guard the gates." Brooks confessed, lifting his head to look at her. Raw vulnerability fractured his intimidating exterior. "I built a violent life. I deal in threats and territory. When you picked up that dagger from your car today, I realized I dragged you into the center of a war zone. You deserve the bright, safe life you are trying to build. My world is going to chase you away." She will run, just like every sane human would. Harper did not flinch. She did not offer empty platitudes about peace. She looked at the man who had ripped a toxic weapon from her car with his bare hands to keep her safe. She looked at the silvery scar on his arm, a testament to his protective nature. She reached across the granite island. She placed her hand over his. Her palm felt warm against his cool knuckles. "Gregory Dunn stole my life without ever throwing a punch," Harper stated, her voice steady and resolute. "Violence comes in many forms, Brooks. I survived a coward in a tailored suit. I am not running away from a brave man who stands between his family and the dark." Brooks stared at their joined hands. The tension in his chest fractured, releasing a breath he felt like he had held for a decade. He turned his hand over, lacing his fingers through hers. He held on tight, anchoring himself to her steady, unshakable strength. "I am not going anywhere," Harper promised. Chapter 17. Harper kept her hand over his. The cool granite of the kitchen island pressed against her elbows, grounding her in the present. Brooks stared at their laced fingers. He traced the smooth ridge of her knuckles with his thumb. The calluses on his skin told the story of a lifetime spent in brutal combat, yet his touch held nothing but deliberate care. "You do not back down from anything," Brooks observed, his voice a low, vibrating rumble that hummed in the quiet space. "I learned the hard way that backing down only gives cowards more room to operate," Harper replied, her tone unwavering. "Gregory took my business because I trusted his title instead of his actions. I promised myself I would never hand over my power again. Sitting in this fortress does not make me weak, Brooks. It makes me a strategist. I know when to use a shield." Brooks lifted his gaze. The dim light from the stove hood illuminated the sharp, striking angles of his face. The tension that usually tight-roped across his broad frame melted away. For the first time since she met him in that terrifying boardroom, the Alpha looked at peace. He stood up from the stool. The casual movement ate up the space between them. He towered over her, his imposing 6'4" height emphasizing the sheer difference in their physical strength. He stepped around the corner of the kitchen island. Harper did not retreat. She tipped her head back to hold his gaze. Brooks reached out. He bypassed her hands and cupped her face. His long fingers rested against her jaw, his thumb brushing the line of her cheekbone. The heat radiating from his skin rivaled a lit furnace. "If I taste her now, I will never let her leave this room." Harper felt her pulse hammer against her ribs. The rhythm thumped wild and fast, a chaotic drumbeat that his Lycan ears easily caught. She parted her lips, drawing in a shaky breath. "You are the most terrifying woman I have ever met," Brooks murmured. He leaned down, closing the distance. His dark eyes searched hers, asking a silent, burning question. Harper answered by sliding her hand up his chest, gripping the soft cotton of his gray t-shirt. She pulled him a fraction of an inch closer. Brooks lowered his head. His breath ghosted across her lips. The anticipation crackled in the air, a physical charge that made the hair on her arms stand up. He tilted his head, ready to claim the kiss. The thick oak double doors down the hallway slammed open with the force of a detonated bomb. The wood cracked against the stone walls, the noise echoing through the secluded wing. "Boss!" Beta Levi Holden shouted, his boots thudding against the hardwood floor as he sprinted into the living area. Brooks went rigid. He tore himself away from Harper, spinning around to face the intrusion. A vicious, primal growl ripped from his throat, a sound of pure, thwarted instinct that rattled the ceramic mugs on the coffee table. Harper stumbled back against the granite counter, her cheeks burning with a stark, undeniable heat. She pressed her palms flat against the stone, trying to hide the blush and steady her erratic breathing. Levi skidded to a halt at the edge of the kitchen. He took one look at the Alpha's lethal posture and Harper's flushed face. The laid-back Beta winced, holding his hands up in a gesture of surrender. "Bad timing," Levi noted, taking a step back toward the hallway. "Terrible timing. I will write myself up for insubordination tomorrow." "Give me a reason not to throw you through the window," Brooks ordered, his chest heaving with suppressed frustration. "Garrett finally broke in the holding cells," Levi explained, his expression turning serious. After 2 weeks of silence, he gave up the location of his remaining fighters. They are staging at the old shipping yards on the East Coast. If we move now, we can end the stragglers before they regroup. Brooks clenched his fists. The Alpha duty called, demanding his attention. He looked back at Harper, the frustration in his eyes warring with his profound reluctance to leave her. "Go," Harper urged, finding her voice. She picked up her lucky yellow click pen from the legal pad. "Finish the fight." Brooks gave a sharp, definitive nod. He stalked past Levi, heading for the armory. Chapter 18. 3 days later, the Oakhurst weather turned overcast and dreary. Harper sat in the passenger seat of the midnight blue armored SUV. Brooks navigated the winding coastal roads, heading toward the east side of the city. The Iron Fang threat seemed handled. Levi and the enforcers had cleared the stragglers out over the weekend, leaving the territory secure. "The zoning permits for this area are non-existent," Harper said, reviewing a digital map on her tablet. "If the Syndicate purchases the abandoned yard, we can convert it into a legitimate commercial logistics hub. It cuts your transport costs in half and gives the city a dozen new tax-paying jobs." "You want to turn a smuggling port into a public warehouse," Brooks clarified, turning the steering wheel. He wore a dark Henley shirt and tactical trousers, his platinum watch gleaming on his left wrist. "I want to make the Copperjaw Syndicate indispensable to the local economy," Harper corrected, shutting the tablet. "When you employ the citizens, you stop being a gang. You become an institution." Brooks parked the armored vehicle near a rusted chain-link fence. The abandoned shipping yard loomed ahead. Towering stacks of decaying metal containers created a labyrinth of rusted corridors. Weeds pushed through the cracked asphalt. The air tasted thick with salt and stagnant water. They stepped out of the SUV. Harper grabbed her brown leather satchel and slung it over her shoulder. She wore practical boots, knowing the terrain would be rough. Brooks led the way through the broken fence. His combat boots crunched against the loose gravel. He scanned the perimeter, his sharp gaze assessing the structural integrity of the warehouses. "The main building needs a new roof," Brooks noted, pointing to a sagging aluminum structure. "The foundational beams are compromised." Harper walked toward the building to inspect the damage. She stopped near a crumbling brick wall. Resting against the masonry was a long, rusted steel pipe. It looked like a discarded piece of scaffolding, thick and unyielding. She made a mental note of the debris, planning to add an environmental cleanup crew to the proposed budget. A low scrape of metal against asphalt echoed through the yard. Brooks stopped walking. His posture snapped into rigid, lethal focus. He held up a hand, signaling Harper to freeze. "We are alone," Harper whispered, confused by the sudden tension. "Levi cleared this sector." "Levi missed a few," Brooks corrected, his voice a low, dangerous hum. Shadows detached from the rusted shipping containers. 5 men stepped into the open, then 10, then 15. They wore tattered clothes and carried crude iron weapons. Their eyes glowed with an unnatural, sickly yellow light. Iron Fang stragglers. They had used the weekend raid as a decoy, hiding the bulk of their surviving forces in the rotting ships docked at the pier. They lured us to the edge of the territory to isolate the Alpha. Harper realized the danger with chilling clarity. This was not a business inspection. It was an execution. "Get behind me," Brooks commanded, shoving Harper toward the crumbling brick wall. The stragglers did not speak. They lunged forward as one unified, violent mass. Brooks did not hesitate. He snapped the platinum watch off his wrist, hurling the metal aside before throwing his head back, an earth-shattering roar tearing from his throat. His bones cracked and popped with sickening volume. The dark Henley tore at the seams as his shoulders expanded, his human form giving way to the primal beast. Chapter 19. The transformation finished in seconds. Brooks towered over the asphalt, a hulking Lycan beast of pure destructive power. He met the charging front line of Iron Fang stragglers with brutal force. He caught the first enemy wolf mid-air, slamming the creature into a rusted shipping container. The metal dented inward with a deafening crash. Brooks spun, his fangs tearing through the shoulder of a second attacker. Blood sprayed across the cracked pavement. The Alpha fought like a force of nature, a localized hurricane of claws and muscle protecting his territory. Harper pressed her back against the brick wall, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm. She watched the chaotic brawl, her steady gaze tracking the movements of the enemy. Brooks held the front line, but the sheer volume of attackers forced him to fight in a tight circle. 3 Iron Fang wolves broke away from the main pack. They crept along the side of the sagging warehouse, using the overgrown weeds for cover. They were circling behind Brooks to strike his blind spot while he grappled with 4 others. "I refuse to be a helpless bystander while my partner fights alone." Harper dropped her leather satchel. She lunged toward the debris pile at the base of the wall. Her fingers wrapped around the rusted steel pipe she spotted earlier. The metal felt cold and heavy, the rough surface biting into her palms. She lifted it, testing the unbalanced weight. It felt like swinging a solid iron baseball bat. The first flanking wolf leaped onto the hood of an abandoned forklift, preparing to launch itself at Brooks's exposed back. Harper did not scream a warning. She acted. She ran forward, her boots pounding against the asphalt. She swung the steel pipe with every ounce of athletic strength she possessed. The heavy metal connected with the side of the enemy wolf's snout. A loud, satisfying crack echoed over the growls. The beast yelped, its momentum shattered. It tumbled off the forklift, hitting the ground in a stunned heap. The sound of the impact drew Brooks's attention. He ripped an attacker away and glanced over his wide shoulder. He saw Harper standing her ground. She held the rusted pipe in a white-knuckled grip, her chest heaving, ready to swing again at the next approaching threat. His human mate was fighting apex predators with scrap metal. The sight ignited a roaring inferno of pride in his chest. She did not run. She stood beside him in the blood and the dirt, defending his flank with fearless determination. The second flanking wolf snarled, turning its glowing yellow eyes toward Harper. It lunged, intending to tear the human apart. Harper braced her feet, raising the pipe higher. Before the beast could close the distance, Brooks cleared the space in a single, terrifying bound. He intercepted the wolf mid-flight, driving it into the concrete with crushing force. He did not let the creature recover. He eliminated the threat, ensuring nothing came within 10 feet of the woman holding the steel pipe. But the distraction cost him. The remaining dozen Iron Fang fighters surged forward, pressing their advantage against the distracted Alpha. Chapter 20. The tide of the battle shifted. The remaining Iron Fang fighters swarmed Brooks, utilizing their numbers to overwhelm his defenses. He threw them back, his claws carving through their ranks, but they kept coming. A hulking enemy wolf feinted left, drawing Brooks's attention, while another lunged from the right, aiming straight for Harper. Brooks roared. He threw his colossal frame backward, placing himself between the lunging beast and the woman he loved. The enemy's claws connected with Brooks's ribcage, slicing a deep, brutal path through his thick fur and flesh. Harper gasped, the sound lost in the chaos of the brawl. Brooks staggered, his blood hitting the asphalt, but he did not fall. He caught the attacking wolf by the throat and threw it across the yard. He backed up, pressing Harper into the corner created by the warehouse wall and the rusted forklift. He formed an impenetrable barricade with his own bleeding body. They dared to touch what is mine, and now they will pay with their lives. Brooks prepared for a final, desperate stand. He bared his fangs, blood dripping from his side, ready to take as many of them down as possible before his strength failed. The enemy wolves circled, recognizing his injury. They prepared to rush the corner. A piercing siren shattered the coastal wind. Headlights flooded the abandoned shipping yard, blinding the Iron Fang fighters. The chain-link fence exploded inward. A convoy of black transport vans and armored SUVs smashed through the rusted metal, tearing into the battleground. The doors flew open before the vehicles stopped moving. Beta Levi Holden leaped from the lead van, his thick tactical gloves gripping a solid silver-plated baton. 24 loyal Copperjaw enforcers flooded the asphalt behind him, their faces twisted in unified territorial rage. "Wipe them out!" Levi roared, pointing his baton at the stragglers. The enforcers crashed into the enemy line. The fight turned into a one-sided slaughter. The fresh, trained Copperjaw fighters dismantled the exhausted Iron Fang wolves with ruthless efficiency. The sounds of combat faded into whimpers of defeat as the threat evaporated under the coordinated strike. Brooks watched his pack secure the yard. The tension drained from his exhausted frame. He let out a long, rattling breath and began the painful process of shifting back to his human form. Harper dropped the steel pipe. The metal clattered against the ground. She rushed forward as Brooks collapsed onto one knee, his human skin pale, his ribcage bleeding from the deep slash. "I have you," Harper promised, dropping to her knees beside him. She pressed her hands against his uninjured shoulder, anchoring him. Levi jogged over, tossing a spare black jacket to the Alpha. Brooks pulled the garment over his shoulders, hiding the worst of the gore. "Tracking beacon on the SUV," Levi explained, looking at the dead stragglers. "When you stopped moving at an abandoned dock, Cora told me to roll the vans. The city is clean, boss. The Iron Fang threat is finished for good." Brooks nodded, leaning his weight against Harper. He looked at the rusted steel pipe resting near her boots. He reached out with a blood-stained hand and tilted her chin up, forcing her to look into his exhausted, adoring eyes. "You defended my blind spot," Brooks whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Accountability in a partnership," Harper replied, offering a shaky, fierce smile. "I do my share of the hard work." Chapter 21. The sterile fluorescent lights of the basement infirmary hummed a low, monotonous tune. Dr. Cora Lynn stood by the metal exam table, her sharp gaze assessing the blood soaking through Brooks's black jacket. The Alpha sat on the edge of the examination bed, his jaw locked tight against the pane. His human skin pale, he kept his uninjured right arm wrapped around Harper's waist, anchoring her to his side. "Get his shirt off," Cora ordered, snapping on a pair of blue latex gloves. She turned to a rolling metal tray, organizing forceps, a curved suturing needle, and a glass jar filled with a dark green paste. "Check her first," Brooks growled, his voice a rough rasp. He refused to release his hold on Harper. "I am fine, Brooks," Harper insisted, resting her hand against his uninjured shoulder. "The claws never touched me." "Your hands are bleeding," Brooks countered, his dark gaze dropping to her palms. Harper looked down. The rough, rusted surface of the steel pipe had torn the skin on her palms, leaving shallow scrapes and angry red blisters across her fingers. The adrenaline of the ambush had masked the stinging pain, but now a dull ache radiated through her hands. "I will tear the rest of this city apart if she carries a single scar from my war." "Sit on the stool, Evans," Cora instructed, pointing to a rolling chair near the counter. Harper obeyed, sliding out of Brooks's grip. Cora abandoned the surgical tray for a moment. The doctor retrieved a bottle of saline solution and a stack of clean white gauze. She grabbed Harper's hands, pouring the cool liquid over the scrapes. The salt burned, but Harper kept her face neutral. She refused to grimace while Brooks sat 2 feet away with a torn ribcage. "Superficial," Cora declared, wrapping a thin layer of gauze around Harper's palms. "Keep them dry. The sting will fade by morning." Brooks let out a harsh breath, the rigid posture of his spine relaxing just a fraction. He unzipped the ruined black jacket and let it drop to the floor. He gritted his teeth, peeling the shredded remnants of his dark Henley over his head. The gash ran deep across his left ribcage, a jagged, brutal testament to the Iron Fang wolf's claws. Cora stepped up to the exam table. She did not offer numbing agents. Lycan physiology burned through standard anesthetics in seconds. She unscrewed the lid of the glass jar. A pungent herbal odor filled the room, carrying the sharp scent of crushed eucalyptus and bitter roots. Cora scooped a generous handful of the green paste and pressed it straight into the open wound. Brooks hissed, his muscles corded with sudden, violent tension. His fingers gripped the edges of the metal table, denting the steel surface under his phenomenal strength. The herbal poultice neutralized the toxic residual effects of the enemy's claws, forcing the Lycan cells to jumpstart the healing process. "Hold still, Alpha," Cora muttered, threading the curved needle. Harper stood up from the stool. She walked to his right side and placed her bandaged hands over his white-knuckled grip on the table. Brooks turned his head, burying his face against her stomach. He breathed in the familiar, steady rhythm of her pulse, using her presence to ground the animal instinct demanding a fight. Cora worked with ruthless efficiency. The needle pierced his skin, pulling the edges of the ragged flesh together. Thick, black medical thread created a neat line of stitches across his ribs. The process took 10 agonizing minutes. Blood washed down the drain built into the floor, swirling with the green remnants of the poultice. "Done," Cora announced, cutting the final thread. She wiped the excess moisture from his side and applied a large square bandage over the stitches. She peeled off her latex gloves and tossed them into a biohazard bin. "Keep the bandage on for 2 days. No shifting, no fighting. Your bones need time to fuse the microfractures, and the skin needs a chance to heal without tearing the thread." Brooks lifted his head, his breathing returning to a steady, even pace. "Understood." Cora picked up her canvas medical bag. She looked at the two of them, her stern features softening with a rare glimmer of approval. She walked to the infirmary door. "I am locking this wing down for the night," Cora stated, her hand on the light switch. "No one comes in. You both need rest." The thick metal door clicked shut, leaving them alone in the quiet room. Chapter 22. The hum of the fluorescent lights felt louder in the empty infirmary. Harper stood next to the exam table. She kept her bandaged hands resting over Brooks's right forearm. The adrenaline of the shipping yard ambush had evaporated, leaving a profound, bone-deep exhaustion in its wake. Brooks stared at the opposite wall. A patchwork of dark bruises painted his chest and abdomen, a visual map of the blunt force trauma he absorbed during the fight. He looked battered. The invincible Alpha Warlord stripped down to a vulnerable, bleeding man. "You could have died today," Brooks whispered. The gravel in his voice scraped against the silent room. "I did not," Harper replied, her tone gentle and resolute. Brooks turned his head, his dark eyes locking onto her face. The primal gold had vanished, leaving a stormy sea of human emotion. "They flanked me. They found my blind spot. If you had frozen, if you had run, Garrett's soldiers would have torn you apart before I could reach you." He reached up, curling his hand around the back of her neck. He pulled her a fraction of an inch closer, pressing his forehead against her stomach. A raw, shuddering breath escaped his chest. "I cannot function without you," Brooks confessed, the words tumbling out like a broken dam. "I spent 10 years building a cage to keep the world out. I thought isolation was the only way to survive. Then you walked into my boardroom with a lucky yellow pen and demanded accountability. You brought light into this fortress. You defended my back with a rusted pipe. You are the only thing keeping my soul anchored." Harper threaded her fingers through the soft strands at the nape of his neck. The short hair brushed against her gauze-wrapped palms. She understood the magnitude of his admission. A man who commanded hundreds of lethal fighters, a man who answered to no one, was kneeling before her and offering everything he possessed. "He gave me the keys to his empire, but handing over his heart is the true surrender. I spent my entire adult life terrified of trusting anyone," Harper admitted, her voice trembling with honesty. "Gregory taught me that partnerships were traps. I promised myself I would never let another person hold the power to destroy my foundation." Brooks lifted his head. He searched her brown eyes, waiting for the rejection he felt his violent life earned him. "But you are not a trap, Brooks," Harper continued, a fierce, protective smile breaking across her face. "You took a blow to the ribs to shield me. You dragged me out of an empty apartment to ensure I was safe. You showed me that a real partner stands in the dirt with you. I am not afraid of your world. I am not afraid of you." The remaining tension in his broad frame snapped. Brooks stood up from the exam table, ignoring the sharp pull of the stitches across his ribs. He wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her flush against his chest. "You are my mate," Brooks declared, the Lycan term carrying a weight far heavier than any human vow. It meant an unbreakable tether, a bond forged in blood and loyalty that surpassed death. "I am your partner," Harper agreed, sliding her hands up his chest to rest on his uninjured shoulders. Brooks dipped his head. He captured her lips in a profound, devastating kiss. There was no hesitation, no holding back. The kiss carried the desperate relief of survival and the intoxicating promise of their future. Harper leaned into him, her heart soaring as he poured every ounce of his devotion into the connection. He tasted like rain and pure, undeniable heat. Brooks groaned against her mouth, a low, rumbling sound of sheer possessive joy. He gathered her closer, mindful of his injured side, wrapping her in a cocoon of safety. The shadows of his tragic past, the ghosts of the Elder Council, the constant vigilance, it all faded away. In the quiet isolation of the basement infirmary, the Alpha finally found his home. Chapter 23. They left the infirmary together. Brooks kept his arm draped around Harper's shoulders, relying on her steady presence as they navigated the compound. The coastal night air felt crisp and cleansing against her skin. The courtyard remained empty, the enforcers giving their leader a wide berth to recover in peace. They reached the secluded stone building of the Alpha's wing. The thick oak double doors still hung lopsided on their hinges, the wood splintered from Levi's dramatic entrance earlier that week. Brooks nudged the broken door open with his boot. The living area sat in shadows. The fireplace held cold, gray ash. Harper did not bother turning on the lamps. She guided him down the left hallway, stepping into his private quarters. The room matched his imposing nature. A sprawling canopy bed dominated the center of the space, covered in dark linen sheets. Thick velvet curtains blocked the moonlight. The air felt charged, a breathless anticipation replacing the lingering exhaustion of the battle. This is not a temporary truce. This is a permanent tether. Brooks turned to face her. He reached out, his long fingers tracing the line of her jaw. His dark eyes burned with a profound, consuming reverence. He did not see a fragile human. He saw a queen who commanded his loyalty without ever raising her voice. "You need to rest," Harper murmured, her hands resting against his chest. She felt the steady, thumping rhythm of his heart beneath her palms. "I need you," Brooks countered, his voice a low, rough caress. He leaned down, capturing her lips again. The kiss started slow, a deliberate exploration of the boundary between them. Harper opened her mouth, inviting him deeper. The cautious exploration ignited into a roaring flame. Brooks walked her backward until her knees hit the edge of the mattress. He followed her down, careful to keep his weight supported on his right forearm. The stitches on his left ribcage pulled tight, but he ignored the sting. His focus narrowed to the woman beneath him. Harper reached up, her bandaged hands pulling the soft cotton of her sweater over her head. She tossed the garment onto the floor. Brooks tracked the movement, his gaze darkening with raw desire. He pressed a trail of heated kisses along her collarbone, his teeth grazing her skin in a gentle, possessive mark. He worshipped every inch of her. He treated her with a delicate reverence that defied his lethal reputation. Harper arched her back, her fingers tangling in the collar of his shirt. She pulled him closer, matching his intense devotion with her own fierce passion. The union merged their stubborn, independent lives into a singular, unbreakable partnership. They moved together in the shadows of the canopy bed, shedding the final layers of their past traumas. Harper anchored his wild spirit, and Brooks provided the unwavering shield she had always deserved. The climax broke over them like a cresting wave, a physical manifestation of their emotional surrender. Harper cried out his name, her nails digging into his uninjured shoulder. Brooks answered with a low, primal groan, his body shivering as he buried his face in the crook of her neck. They collapsed against the dark linens, their breathing tangled and ragged. Brooks rolled onto his back to relieve the pressure on his stitches. He pulled Harper flush against his side, tucking her head under his chin. He pulled the thick quilt over them, cocooning them in the residual warmth of their passion. For the first time in 10 years, Brooks Callahan did not listen for footsteps in the hallway. He did not run tactical scenarios in his head. He closed his eyes, wrapped his arm around his mate, and let a profound, unshakable peace pull him into a deep sleep. Chapter 24. Sunlight poured through the tall, arched windows of the Alpha's wing, a direct result of Harper's redecorating crusade. The bright beams chased away the lingering shadows in the grand living area. Harper stood at the kitchen island, wearing one of Brooks's spare black t-shirts. The hem reached her mid-thigh. She poured steaming coffee into her dented stainless steel thermos. Beside her feet, waffles chewed on a premium dog treat. Footsteps echoed from the hallway. Brooks walked into the kitchen. He wore dark, tactical trousers and a fresh gray Henley. The shirt stretched tight across his chest, hiding the large, square bandage over his ribs. He looked different. The crushing, dark aura that always surrounded him was gone. His shoulders sat relaxed, free from the invisible weight of constant vigilance. He walked up behind Harper, wrapping his arms around her waist. He pressed a warm kiss to the side of her neck, a public display of affection he never would have allowed a week ago. "Good morning," Brooks rumbled, his voice thick with sleep and contentment. "Morning," Harper smiled, leaning back against his solid frame. "Are you ready to face your people?" Brooks let out a rich, genuine laugh. "They will survive." They walked out of the Alpha's wing together. Brooks did not stalk ahead to clear the path. He kept his pace matched to hers, his large hand enveloping hers. They entered the main dining hall. The expansive room buzzed with the morning routine of the Copperjaw enforcers. Men and women in tactical gear sat at the long wooden tables, eating breakfast over the vibrant blue table runners Harper had installed. The clatter of silverware and low conversation filled the air. Brooks pushed one of the solid oak doors open, stepping into the room with Harper by his side. A sudden, sweeping silence fell over the hall. Forks hovered in midair. Coffee cups stalled halfway to open mouths. Dozens of hardened Lycan fighters stared at their leader. Brooks Callahan, the terrifying warlord who ruled the coastal territory with an iron fist, was holding a human woman's hand. More shocking than the linked fingers was his expression. Brooks offered a relaxed, genuine smile to the room. The warlord is gone, leaving only the man behind. The enforcers looked terrified. A smiling Alpha broke every rule of their established reality. Several fighters near the front exchanged panicked glances, wondering if an imposter had infiltrated the compound. Beta Levi Holden sat at the head table, a plate of scrambled eggs in front of him. His sharp gray suit looked pristine, a stark contrast to the ruined clothes he wore during the dock-fight. He stared at the smiling Alpha, his jaw dropping open in exaggerated horror. "Someone call Dr. Cora," Levi announced, his voice carrying across the silent hall. "The boss took a blow to the head. He forgot how to scowl." A collective gasp echoed from the nearest table. The enforcers waited for the inevitable explosion of Alpha rage. They braced for Levi to get thrown through a wall. Instead, Brooks stopped walking. His smile widened into a full, bright grin. The deep, rich sound of his laughter rolled through the dining hall, a joyous noise that chased the final shadows out of the Copperjaw Syndicate. "I am fine, Levi," Brooks replied, pulling out a chair for Harper. "Eat your eggs before I give them to the dog." Levi let out a bark of relief, the tension shattering across the room. The enforcers erupted into cheers, the sound of their combined joy rattling the high windows. Harper took her seat, her gaze dancing with amusement as Brooks sat beside her. Levi slid her brown leather satchel across the table, having recovered it from the shipping yard. She unzipped the familiar bag, pulled out her lucky yellow click pen, and prepared to write the next chapter of their lives. Chapter 25. The air in the subterranean holding cells tasted of damp earth and rusted iron. Shadows clung to the rough-hewn stone walls, undisturbed by the flickering orange light of the torches placed along the corridor. Harper walked beside Brooks, her sensible boots echoing against the cold floor. The dull ache in her scraped palms served as a sharp reminder of the shipping yard ambush. Brooks moved with a slow, deliberate cadence. He wore a simple black t-shirt and tactical trousers. The fabric stretched tight across his chest, concealing the thick line of stitches holding his left ribcage together. He kept his right hand resting near the small of Harper's back, a grounding anchor in the damp depths of the Copperjaw compound. They reached the end of the corridor. A thick steel door stood open, guarded by two hulking enforcers. Inside the cell, Garrett kneeled on the stone floor. The defeated Iron Fang Alpha looked pathetic. Dirt and dried blood matted his hair. Thick iron chains bound his wrists and ankles, securing him to a steel ring bolted into the floor. The metal clanked, a harsh, grating sound, as Garrett lifted his head. His eyes, devoid of their sickly yellow glow, fixed on Brooks with pure, unadulterated venom. "You brought the human to gloat," Garrett sneered, spitting a glob of blood onto the stones. "The great warlord of the coast needs a fragile pet to hold his hand." Brooks did not raise his voice. He did not draw a weapon. He stepped into the cell, his towering, lethal physique eclipsing the torchlight. He released a localized, suffocating wave of pure alpha authority. The pressure hit the room like a physical shockwave. The two enforcers at the door dropped their chins in immediate submission. Garrett gasped, his shoulders hunching under the crushing, invisible weight. Harper stood unaffected, immune to the Lycan dominance. She watched the man she loved navigate the brutal reality of his world. If she were not standing in this room, I would paint these stone walls with his blood. Brooks locked his jaw, suppressing the violent urges of his inner beast. He remembered the slaughtered Elder Council. He remembered the silver dagger buried in the hood of the plum-colored Honda Civic. "Your pack is broken, Garrett," Brooks stated, his tone a flat, vibrating rumble that rattled the chains. "Your surviving fighters surrendered their territory markers this morning. You hold no land. You command no wolves. You are an alpha of nothing." Garrett strained against the iron bindings, his chest heaving. "Kill me, Callahan. End it like your father should have done." Brooks stared down at the broken rival. A decade ago, a younger, wilder version of himself would have delivered a fatal blow without hesitation. But the dark, isolated cage he built for himself was gone. He had a future to protect, and that future required a leader, not a butcher. "Death is a mercy you have not earned," Brooks countered. He uncrossed his arms, the titanium ring in his pocket bumping against his thigh. "I strip you of your rank. The Copperjaw Syndicate will transfer you to the High Council in the mountain sector. They demand an audience with the wolf who brought toxic silver to a peace summit. You will spend the rest of your miserable life rotting in their glacial prisons." Garrett paled. The mountain prisons offered a fate far worse than a quick execution. It meant decades of frozen isolation. "You coward!" Brooks ignored the outburst. He turned his back on the prisoner, a profound dismissal that shattered the last remnants of Garrett's pride. The Alpha walked out of the cell, joining Harper in the corridor. "Take him away," Brooks ordered the enforcers. Harper fell into step beside her mate as they walked toward the stairwell. The suffocating tension of the underground cells gave way to the fresh coastal breeze drafting down from the upper levels. She looked at the sharp, striking angles of his face. The rigid line of his jaw had relaxed. "You chose justice over vengeance," Harper observed, her voice ringing clear in the stairwell. Brooks stopped on the top step. He turned to face her, his dark gray eyes searching hers. "I chose a life with you. I cannot build a bright future if I keep sinking into the dark." Harper smiled, a fierce, unwavering expression. She reached out, resting her healing hands against his chest. The steady, powerful rhythm of his heartbeat thumped against her palms. She pulled him down, pressing a soft, lingering kiss to his lips, sealing the judgment and stepping into the light. Chapter 26. The mid-morning sun glared through the boardroom glass, illuminating the mahogany table. Harper sat at the head of the room, her brown leather satchel resting on the floor beside her chair. She twisted the lucky yellow click pen in her bandaged hands. Her dented stainless steel thermos sat on a coaster next to a stack of finalized contracts. Across the table sat Simon Trent, the head of a regional maritime logistics firm. Trent wore a flashy pinstripe suit. He exuded an irritating brand of corporate arrogance, his posture slouched in the high-backed leather chair. Brooks leaned against the wall near the solid oak doors. He wore a casual black t-shirt that highlighted his muscular frame. He kept his posture rigidly still, watching the proceedings in total silence. The Alpha allowed his mate to run the operational front of the Syndicate, acting as her silent, imposing shadow. "These projected margins are ridiculous, sweetheart," Trent scoffed, tossing a financial brief onto the table. He directed his gaze past Harper, aiming his words at Brooks. "Callahan, be reasonable. You cannot expect my freighters to transport your imported steel at a flat rate. Fuel costs fluctuate. I need a 10% variable clause." Brooks did not move a muscle. He kept his dark eyes fixed on Trent, his expression unreadable. He did not utter a single syllable to rescue the contractor. Harper tapped her yellow pen against the wood. The sharp plastic sound echoed in the quiet room, drawing Trent's attention back to the head of the table. "Mr. Trent," Harper began, her tone polite but laced with sharp steel. "The Copperjaw Syndicate now holds exclusive ownership of the eastern shipping yards. We overhauled the infrastructure. We replaced the decaying aluminum roofs and secured the foundational beams. We offer a streamlined, delay-free loading zone." Trent rolled his eyes, a condescending smirk twisting his lips. "I appreciate the history lesson, Miss Evans, but the Warlord and I need to handle the men's business." The temperature in the boardroom plummeted. Brooks's jaw locked. A low, vibrating hum resonated in his chest, a warning rumble that made the hair on Trent's arms stand up. "I spent years shrinking to make fragile men comfortable, but this warlord builds a throne for me." Harper did not flinch. She picked up a separate manila folder and slid it across the mahogany surface. "The men's business requires a basic understanding of supply and demand," Harper corrected. "Open the folder, Simon." Trent hesitated under the crushing weight of Brooks's silent glare. He reached out with trembling fingers and flipped the cover open. "That is a list of your top 3 competitors," Harper explained, unscrewing the lid of her thermos to take a calm sip of coffee. "They agreed to the flat rate without a variable clause. If you refuse to sign the contract in front of you today, the Syndicate will revoke your docking privileges. Your freighters will wait off the coast for days, burning the fuel you claim is so expensive. You will lose millions." Trent swallowed hard. The arrogant smirk vanished, replaced by a pale, panicked realization. He looked at the numbers, his eyes darting across the pages. He realized the human woman held a flawless tactical advantage. He looked toward the door, seeking a reprieve. "Brooks, come on," Trent pleaded. Brooks uncrossed his arms. He pushed off the wall and took 2 slow, deliberate steps toward the table. He placed his large hands on the back of Harper's chair, a physical manifestation of his unwavering support. "You address the head of the table, Trent," Brooks ordered, his voice a gravelly threat. "She speaks for the Copperjaw Syndicate. If you disrespect my partner again, you will leave this compound with broken legs." Trent grabbed his designer pen. He scribbled his signature across the bottom of the flat-rate contract with frantic speed. He shoved the documents back across the table, grabbed his briefcase, and rushed out of the boardroom without another word. The heavy oak doors clicked shut behind him. Harper capped her pen and placed it in her satchel. She let out a long, victorious breath. "That went well." Brooks chuckled, a rich, deep sound that filled the room. He leaned down, pressing a warm kiss to the crown of her head. You terrified him, Harper. You are a lethal weapon with a spreadsheet. Accountability dictates success, Harper smiled, leaning back against his solid chest. She looked at the signed contract. The Syndicate was legitimate, profitable, and secure. They were an unstoppable pair. Chapter 27. The afternoon air buzzed with life in the Copperjaw courtyard. Harper sat at a wrought iron patio table near the center fountain. The vibrant blue table runners inside the dining hall matched the bright, cloudless sky. Enforcers sparred on the training mats, their shouts mingling with the ringing clash of quarterstaffs. Brooks sat next to her, reviewing a thick stack of invoices. He no longer hid in the dismal isolation of his office. He spent his days in the open, anchored by Harper's bright presence. The dark, brooding warlord had evolved into a grounded, observant leader. His stitched ribcage healed faster with every passing day, the Lycan physiology performing its silent miracles. Harper's cell phone vibrated against the metal table. She glanced at the screen. The caller ID flashed a name she had not seen in a year. Gregory Dunn. Her stomach tightened, an instinctual reaction to the man who stole her firm and ruined her reputation. The memory of the unpaid business loans and the empty bank accounts clawed at her mind. She stared at the buzzing device. Brooks paused his reading. He noticed the shift in her posture. His sharp gray gaze dropped to the phone. A familiar protective heat flared in his chest, his jaw setting in a hard line. He reached out to cover her hand with his, offering a silent anchor. Harper took a deep breath. She picked up the phone and accepted the call. "Hello, Gregory," Harper greeted, keeping her voice even and detached. "Harper," Gregory replied, his tone dripping with fake, desperate charm. "I heard the news. The industry rumors say you landed the exclusive Copperjaw marketing contract. That is incredible. I always knew you had talent." "Get to the point," Harper demanded. Gregory cleared his throat. "Our old LLC operating agreement has a non-compete clause. By law, any maritime contracts you sign fall under the jurisdiction of my firm, but I am willing to let it slide. We should grab dinner in the city and discuss folding you back into the company. I miss our dynamic. The ghost of my past holds no power in the sunlight of my present." Harper looked across the courtyard. She watched Waffles the Pomeranian demand belly rubs from a towering, scarred enforcer. She felt the lingering warmth of his protective presence. She squeezed Brooks's hand, a fierce surge of confidence washing away the last remnants of her fear. "Listen to my next words, Gregory," Harper stated, her voice forged from pure steel. "Your firm holds zero jurisdiction over my work. The Copperjaw Syndicate employs a team of ruthless corporate lawyers. If you attempt to enforce a fraudulent non-compete clause, they will dissect your finances, expose your predatory loans, and bury you in litigation until you are bankrupt." Silence stretched across the line. The fake charm evaporated. "You have no power without me," Gregory spat, the coward showing his true colors. "I manage the wealth of an empire," Harper countered, leaning back in her chair. "I sit beside a man who commands an army. Do not ever call this number again. The next time you hear my name, it will be on a cease and desist order." She ended the call, blocking the number with 2 swift taps on the screen. She set the phone face down on the wrought iron table, the tether to her past severed with a satisfying, decisive snap. Brooks watched her, his chest swelling with profound pride. He reached out, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. "He is handled?" Brooks asked, his voice a low, rough caress. "He is history," Harper confirmed, offering a genuine, brilliant smile. She looked at the enforcers laughing near the barracks. She looked at the Alpha Warlord holding her hand in the bright sunlight. "This is my home," Harper declared, the words carrying the weight of a sacred vow. Brooks pulled her out of her chair and into his lap. He wrapped his strong arms around her waist, burying his face in the crook of her neck. He breathed in the scent of sweet almond, the fragrance grounding him in the beautiful reality they built together. And you are its heart. Chapter 28. Dusk settled over the Oakhurst coastline, painting the compound in shades of twilight. The entire Copperjaw pack gathered in the main courtyard. The atmosphere felt charged with intense, solemn energy. 50 enforcers stood in rigid, straight ranks, their dark, tactical gear blending into the evening shadows. Harper stood near the front, wearing her favorite oversized sweater and practical jeans. A profound sense of belonging radiated from her posture. She bit the inside of her cheek, fighting a losing battle against a wide grin. Brooks stood beside her, radiating pure warlord authority. He wore a crisp white button-down shirt, the sleeves rolled to expose his thick forearms and the silvery scar on his left bicep. He kept his expression locked in a mask of serious, intimidating focus. The sea of fighters parted down the middle, creating a wide aisle. Beta Levi Holden marched down the center. He wore his sharp navy suit, his posture rigid with military precision. He carried a small wooden box resting on a velvet pillow. He stopped 10 feet in front of the Alpha, executing a sharp, formal bow. "Bring forth the recruit," Brooks commanded, his voice booming across the silent stones. A collective breath hitched in the crowd. From the back of the formation, a tiny, golden-furred Pomeranian trotted down the aisle. Waffles moved with incredible purpose, his tail held high. He ignored the towering, lethal fighters flanking him on both sides. He marched straight to the front and sat down before the Beta, letting out a single, sharp bark. "My father built an army of killers, but my mate turned them into a family." Brooks felt his chest tighten with genuine affection. Levi dropped to one knee. He opened the wooden box with extreme reverence. Inside rested a tiny, custom-made leather collar studded with miniature steel spikes. A miniature gold Copperjaw emblem dangled from the buckle. "You have shown unparalleled bravery," Levi announced, delivering the speech with a straight face. "You guarded the Alpha's wing with relentless vigilance. You intimidated the gate guards into submission. Do you swear to protect this pack and demand belly rubs from all trespassers?" Waffles tilted his head, his tiny ears perking up at the sound of the Beta's voice. "I will take that as a yes," Levi declared. He reached out and fastened the studded leather collar around the fluffy neck. "I formally swear you in as an honorary enforcer of the Copperjaw Syndicate." The Pomeranian puffed his little chest out, looking fiercely proud of his new gear. He let out another fierce bark of acceptance. Then, a bright green grasshopper landed on the stone pavement 3 feet away. Waffles froze, his predatory instincts engaged. He abandoned his post, bounding after the insect with chaotic, clumsy leaps. The bug vaulted over a training mat, and the tiny honorary enforcer scrambled after it, forgetting the solemn ceremony. The serious facade of the pack shattered. A booming, joyous roar of laughter erupted from the enforcers. The hulking fighters broke ranks, slapping each other on the back and cheering for the tiny dog chasing a bug across the courtyard. Levi collapsed onto the pavement, living until tears streamed down his face. Harper leaned against Brooks, her shoulders shaking with mirth. She clutched her stomach, watching her ridiculous dog terrorize the insect. Brooks wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her flush against his side. A deep, rich chuckle rumbled in his chest, adding to the joyous noise echoing off the stone walls. He looked at his people, no longer an isolated army, but a vibrant, thriving family. He looked down at his mate. Harper met his look, her expression bright with unshakable happiness. He leaned down, pressing a lingering, devastating kiss to her lips under the twilight sky. The dark shadows of his past were vanquished, replaced by a brilliant, noisy, and perfect happily ever after. The end.